What if the person shielding you on a midnight flight was the very man people whispered about in fear? What if the truth about your family did not end with a marriage certificate, a house key, or a last name, but with a secret that could rewrite your life? The wine glass hit the wall. Red streaks slid down like slow rain. Nora Hayes did not cry. Not this time. She slipped her passport from the kitchen drawer, the one she had packed with emergency cash, and a photocopy of her birth certificate, the only paper she trusted. Outside, Seattle rain hammered the porch. A taxi's headlights broke the dark. She ran. No suitcase, no coat warm enough for the storm. Only a purse, a heartbeat, and a choice. At the airport, the board flickered. Rome. One way. Nora bought the ticket with shaking hands. On the plane, turbulence rose like a fist. The man beside her covered her hand with his. Calm voice, slow breath. Pretend you are with me. She thought he was kind. She did not yet know his name. Matteo Vitale. Nor that the life she was escaping would collide with the life she was born to forget. Nora Hayes loved quiet jobs. Places where she could count things. Stack things, make a small corner of the world behave. On weekday mornings, she opened the tiny art supply store on Pike Street, the one that smelled like cedar pencils and linseed oil. She cleaned the glass case with a cloth that had once been a dish towel. She wrote prices in careful block letters so customers with tired eyes could read them. When the doorbell chimed, she greeted people by name. When no one came, she listened to the soft tick of the wall clock and let her shoulders settle. Money was thin. It had been thin for a long time. She kept a spiral notebook in her purse and wrote down every dollar, bus fare, eggs, a new pair of stockings only when the old pair ran to the ankle. She was 29 and felt older than her years. Not because of the lines that had started at the edge of her eyes, but because of the way she measured each day in small, safe steps. A careful life, a quiet life, a life that could disappear without anyone making a fuss. On the top shelf of her clothes closet sat a shoebox. Inside was her touchstone, a cracked leather sketchbook with a broken spine and the faint smell of turpentine. The book had been her mother's, a woman who painted street corners and church steps, and the old ferry dock where gulls circled like gray kites. When Nora was 9, her mother disappeared from their apartment without goodbye or note. People said the woman had run off. Others said she had been ill. No one told the same story twice. All Nora had was the sketchbook, the pencil marks so light they looked like breath on paper, and a name on the flyleaf, written in a looping hand, L. Hayes. Nora flipped through those pages whenever the world felt too loud. There were studies of hands at rest, a little girl in a yellow coat seen from behind, a cathedral dome sketched from memory. In the back pocket of the book, she kept a folded index card with 2 lines her mother had copied from a plaque at a museum. Art is a promise we make to ourselves. Keep your promises when no one is watching. Nora read those lines in the morning before work. She read them at night before sleep. She read them after arguments that rang in her bones long after the bedroom door closed. Evan Brooks liked noise. He liked rooms where his laugh landed first. He liked dinners where the server learned his name in 5 minutes and the manager learned it in 10. At home, he liked the hum of a new sound system and the thud of his shoes in the hall. He liked order that wore his face. In the beginning, he had been charming. He brought flowers with grocery lists. He kissed her knuckles and joked that she held a pencil like a conductor's baton. Then the jokes turned. The flowers stopped. The house grew smaller around his schedule and his temper, so Nora learned to make herself a small target. She left early for work and stayed late to balance invoices. She took the long way home past the library with the copper roof, because the quiet walk gave her time to breathe. She saved cash in 5s and 10s. She made copies of important papers and hid the originals in a place no one would look under the paper liner of the kitchen drawer where she had also slipped her passport months earlier. One habit at a time, she built a ladder only she could see. On Sundays, when Evan watched football and filled the living room with game day noise, Nora sat at the kitchen table with her mother's sketchbook. She sharpened a single pencil to a fine point and drew the same subject over and over, a narrow bridge with angels on its balustrade, a bridge she had never seen but knew from the pages of an old travel guide she found at a thrift store. The guide's spine was cracked. The photographs were faded, but the words under one picture made her throat tight every time. The bridge stands where the city keeps its oldest promises. She did not know why those words felt like a map. She only knew she copied them down on the inside cover of the sketchbook and circled them twice. She kept one bag packed under the bed, not a suitcase. A canvas tote no one would notice, a pair of jeans, one sweater, 2 changes of underwear rolled tight. The sketchbook slipped between shirts, the index card tucked in the back. A spare bus pass, enough to move the body when the mind said go. She checked the bag once a week. She told herself it was a drill the way office buildings hold fire drills to practice getting out alive. When customers asked what she wanted to do someday, Nora smiled and said she was happy right where she was. It was not a lie. The store was safe. The shelves stood still. The pencils stayed lined up in their trays. It was the rest of her life that shifted like sand. She could feel time pushing at her back. She could feel a different life pressing from the other side of the wall. She could not name it. She could not open the door to it. Not yet. The day the wine glass hit the wall, Nora did not flinch. She reached for a dish towel. She wiped her cheek. She looked at the drawer where the paper liner lifted at one corner. She thought of a bridge she had never crossed, of angels cut from stone, of promises kept in cities older than the noise in her living room. She folded the dish towel. She opened the drawer. She pressed her thumb to the paper seam and lifted. Matteo Vitale was a name people spoke in lowered voices. In Rome, in New York, and Chicago, boardrooms where contracts were signed with champagne and silence, his family name was shorthand for influence. His grandfather had built shipping fleets in the 1950s when Europe still smelled of coal dust and diesel. His father had turned those fleets into Empire's wine imports, marble exports, logistics companies that touched every port on the Mediterranean. By the time Matteo inherited the mantle, the Vitale family's reach extended far beyond the harbor cranes. He lived in a villa on the Aventine Hill, a place where stone walls held centuries of secrets. Cypress trees lined the driveway, and fountains whispered under lantern light. Inside, the marble floors reflected ceilings painted with cherubs and storm clouds. There were rooms for every mood, a library lined with first editions in Italian, French, English. A dining room with a table long enough for 20 guests, where no laughter ever reached the end. A private chapel his grandmother had once prayed in daily. Servants moved through the house like shadows, anticipating needs before he voiced them. But Matteo carried silence with him. Silence in the way he lifted a glass of Barolo and held it to the light. Silence in the way he paused at windows overlooking the Tiber, as though searching for something he had lost years ago. He had studied in London, spoken in Davos, worn tuxedos in halls where presidents and cardinals nodded to him as an equal. And yet at night when the city fell quiet, he walked alone through rooms filled with wealth that meant nothing to him. His world was gold and glass, but it was also blood and duty. Family dinners where loyalty was tested with a glance. Boardroom meetings where deals were sealed with words no court could ever record. Matteo knew how to bend a politician with a favor. He knew which judge preferred cash and which one preferred silence. He knew how to lift a hand at a meeting and watch 5 men's futures shift overnight. Power was muscle memory. Power was the air he breathed, and yet power left him restless. On his wrist he wore a heavy watch, but his eyes drifted instead to a thin scar above his knuckle, a reminder of a fight from his youth when fists, not lawyers, decided outcomes. On his nightstand sat a photograph of his mother, long gone, smiling in a garden of sunflowers. He rarely spoke of her, but her absence weighed on him more than his empire did. The men around him, his uncles, his cousins, his father's trusted advisors, expected him to grow harder with each passing year, to crush opposition, to expand, to control. He did those things because he had to. But in quiet moments, Matteo envied those who lived without bodyguards, without eyes watching from every corner of the piazza. He envied those who bought bread in the morning and carried it home in a paper bag, worried only about rent or weather. On his desk lay reports of territories and shipments. But what caught his attention more than the numbers were names. Names of people caught in his orbit. A shop owner who had borrowed too much. A nephew of a rival family who had vanished without goodbye. A woman in Seattle whose bruises told him more than she could ever say aloud. He had seen her board a plane, wet hair clinging to her cheeks, clothes wrinkled, hands trembling. He had recognized the look in her eyes, the look of someone who had stopped believing in rescue but still dared to run. He had not meant to sit beside her. He had not meant to reach for her hand during turbulence. And yet when the plane shook and she shook harder, he found himself steadying her. He did not give comfort often. Comfort was weakness in his world. But her presence reminded him of the promise he had made long ago, that if he ever had the power to stop cruelty, he would. In Rome, people saw Matteo Vitale as untouchable, a figure carved in marble, cold and commanding. But on that storm-tossed night flight out of Seattle, he was simply a man in seat 12A, watching a stranger cling to courage she no longer believed she had. The plane touched down in Zurich for its layover, and Nora Hayes thought she might finally breathe again. But the truth was that freedom never arrives quietly. It tests you, pushes you into corners where choices must be made. As passengers stood and shuffled into the aisle, Matteo Vitale's hand brushed the small of her back. The touch was protective, not possessive, but enough to make her pause. "Remember what I told you," he murmured. "Stay close. Pretend you're with me." At first, Nora thought he was exaggerating. But when she stepped into the terminal, she saw them, 3 men in dark suits, their eyes sweeping the crowd with predatory precision. One of them raised his phone, comparing faces to an image. And then, impossibly, his gaze snagged on her. Her heart slammed. David. Her husband. The man she had outrun in the storm. Somehow his reach had followed her across the ocean. She froze, but Matteo moved instantly. His arm slid around her shoulders, pulling her against his side with the casual ease of a husband escorting his wife. His breath warmed her ear. "Don't look at them. You're safe." The men hesitated. Their eyes flicked to Matteo and their posture shifted. Fear, respect, something unspoken that made them step back. They spoke into a phone, then melted into the terminal crowd. By the time Nora sat back in her seat for the final leg to Rome, her mind was reeling. Who was this man? Why had armed strangers, men clearly sent to drag her backed away at his glance? The turbulence of the flight was nothing compared to the storm inside her. In Rome, her relief was brief. She followed Matteo to baggage claim, grateful for his presence but wary of the shadows that seemed to follow him. Then her stomach dropped. 2 other men stood at the exit doors holding up a photograph, her wedding picture, her smile frozen in lace and lies. "Oh God," she whispered. "He found me again." The men began showing the picture to travelers. Nora turned to bolt, but Matteo stepped forward. His stride was unhurried, his voice low, his body language almost casual. She watched in stunned silence as the men's arrogance drained from their faces. They pocketed the photo. They walked away without another word. When Matteo returned, he spoke with the same calm he had used on the plane. "They're gone." "What did you say to them?" she asked. "That they were mistaken," he replied. "That the woman they were looking for wasn't here. They saw me." They knew better than to argue. It should have terrified her. Instead, it left her shaken in another way. The man beside her wasn't merely kind. He wasn't merely observant. He was powerful in a way that made hired thugs retreat without a fight. And suddenly Nora realized she was caught between two cages. One built by a cruel husband who had claimed ownership of her life. The other built by a man whose very name could command obedience. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who keeps his promises," Matteo said. But his eyes, dark and unreadable, revealed something heavier. Something dangerous. That night, Nora lay awake in a Roman pension, arranged by Matteo, replaying every word, every glance, every silence. The sketchbook under her pillow reminded her of promises her mother had once written. Keep your promises when no one is watching. But what if the man now keeping promises for her was feared across 3 continents? The conflict had begun not just between Nora and her husband, but within her own heart, between the safety she craved and the dangerous protector who had made that safety possible. 3 nights in Rome gave Nora Hayes something she had not felt in years: silence without fear. Maria, the silver-haired woman who ran the pension, left cornetti and coffee on a tray each morning. In the afternoons, Nora wandered cobblestone streets with her mother's sketchbook pressed to her chest like a shield. She sat near fountains and sketched arches, columns, angel statues. She told herself she was healing. She told herself she was free. But freedom was fragile. On the 4th day, as church bells struck noon, Nora stepped into a narrow bookshop near the Spanish Steps. The air smelled of leather and dust, the kind of place her mother would have loved. She pulled a book of Renaissance drawings from the shelf only to freeze. Tucked inside was a folded sheet of paper yellowed with age. Her name was written on the outside. Not Hayes, her birth name, Nora Vitale. Her throat closed. She unfolded the paper with trembling hands. The letter was in English, but written with a hand that looped like her mother's sketches. If you are reading this, it means you have found the place I could not keep safe. They told me to disappear to protect you. The Vitale name carries power, but it also carries danger. Forgive me. I could not give you both. Nora sank into a wooden chair, the book sliding from her lap. Her mother had not vanished because of illness or abandonment. She had been hidden. Hidden from the very family whose name now belonged to the man who had saved her on a storm-tossed flight. Matteo Vitale. The puzzle pieces slammed together in her chest, each sharper than the last. The sketchbook, the words about promises, the way strangers in airports feared him, the way his presence made the world rearrange itself. He wasn't just a stranger who happened to sit beside her. He was kin, blood of the same name, blood of the... When Matteo arrived that evening, stepping into the bookshop's back room where she still sat shaking, she thrust the letter at him. "Tell me this isn't true," she whispered. He read the page in silence, jaw tight, then set it gently on the table. His eyes did not meet hers. "So it is true," Nora said, voice breaking. "My mother was one of you, and you." She staggered back. "You knew. You knew the moment you saw me." Matteo finally spoke, his voice low, heavy, with something that sounded like regret. "I suspected. The sketchbook. The look in your eyes. But I wasn't certain. Not until now." Her tears blurred the shop's dusty windows. "You saved me on that plane because I was family, not because I was me." "No," Matteo said quickly, stepping closer. "I saved you because I saw someone drowning. Family or not, I would have." He stopped, swallowed, tried again. "I would have done the same." But Nora could not hear comfort. The truth thundered too loudly in her ears. For years she had thought she was invisible, powerless, trapped by a man's cruelty. Now she was told her blood tied her to an empire that frightened governments. An empire her mother had fled to protect her. The sketchbook slipped from her arms and hit the floor with a dull thud. "Why didn't she tell me?" Nora whispered. "Why hide the truth all these years?" Matteo's gaze softened, but his words cut deep. "Because the Vitale name is both crown and chain. She wanted you free of both. She failed only in keeping it secret forever. Nora wrapped her arms around herself. The shop felt smaller, the air heavier. She wanted to scream, to run, to throw the letter into the fountain outside and watch the ink dissolve. But the words were already burned into her. Her life was no longer hers alone. And for the first time since fleeing Seattle, Nora wondered if freedom was only another word for exile, one she might never truly escape. The revelation of her bloodline clung to Nora like a second skin. She could not peel it away, no matter how many times she opened her mother's sketchbook and traced the faded pencil lines. Every drawing now looked like a message she had failed to read. Every curve of graphite whispered, "You were never ordinary." 2 nights later, as storm clouds gathered over Rome, Matteo summoned her to a place she had never seen, his private offices high above the city. Marco, his driver, guided her through an underground garage where armed men nodded with crisp precision. An elevator carried her upward in silence until the doors opened into a chamber of glass and shadows. The skyline of Rome glittered beyond the windows. Inside, a long table stretched beneath crystal lights. Men in tailored suits rose as she entered their gazes, sharp, assessing, calculating. These were not politicians or businessmen. They were the backbone of the Vitale Empire, men whose decisions decided who prospered and who vanished. Matteo's hand rested lightly at her back as he introduced her. "This is Nora." Her name hung in the room like a question. Some of the men inclined their heads with old-world courtesy. Others frowned, murmuring in Italian words she did not understand, but their tone made her skin prickle. The meeting unfolded in careful phrases. Territories, shipments, courts swayed by whispers rather than evidence. And then Seattle. The word cut through her like glass. One man reported that David Brooks, her husband, had filed claims with the embassy. Another added that those claims had already been discouraged. She realized with icy clarity that her escape had been shaped not only by courage, but by strings Matteo had pulled while she was sleeping. Her hands shook in her lap. This was not protection. This was control on a scale she had never imagined. After the meeting, when the others had left with their murmured goodbyes, Nora confronted Matteo by the wide windows. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the city into smudges of gold. "You've been moving pieces on a board I never agreed to play," she said, her voice trembling. Matteo's jaw tightened. "I kept you safe." At what cost? Her tears spilled hot and unrelenting. "Do you understand what this feels like? I escaped a man who controlled every step I took, and now I'm here with you realizing I may have stepped into another prison. One lined with silk instead of chains." For the first time, Matteo's mask cracked. His voice softened to something raw. "You think I want to cage you, Nora?" He stopped, closed his eyes, searched for words he had never spoken aloud. "When I was 12, my father brought a woman into our home. She was bruised, terrified. Her husband had broken her spirit. For 3 days she stayed with us, and on the 4th she went back. 2 weeks later she was dead. I swore then that if I ever had the power to stop such things, I would. You remind me of her, but stronger. And I cannot," his voice faltered, "I cannot watch you be hurt." Nora's sob escaped, like something torn from her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to fall into the warmth of his protection, the strength of a man who could make predators vanish with a glance. But the same strength terrified her. "Don't you see," she whispered. "If I let you make every danger disappear, I'll never know if my choices are mine. I'll never know if I'm with you because I want to be, or because you've removed every other option." The words hung between them, heavier than stone. Matteo's dark eyes shimmered with something close to grief. He stepped forward, then stopped himself, hands curling into fists at his sides. "What do you want, Nora?" he asked finally, his voice breaking on the edges. "I want to learn what freedom feels like when no one is protecting me," she said. Her confession split the silence. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, two people stood inches apart, bound by blood, by fate, by a truth too heavy to carry together. Nora pressed an envelope into his hand. Thick paper, her handwriting on the front. Don't read it now. Read it tonight. Alone. She rose on her toes, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "Thank you for saving me, but I have to save myself now." When she left, Matteo remained by the window, the envelope pressed to his chest like both a wound and a vow. For the first time in his life, a man who commanded presidents and terrified rivals let someone he loved walk away. 3 mornings later, Nora Hayes stood on the Ponte Sant'Angelo. The river flowed beneath her feet, ancient waters carrying stories of emperors and exiles alike. Rome stirred awake around her vendors, arranging trinkets, children chasing pigeons, couples strolling with espresso cups in hand. The city felt eternal, yet she felt brand new, as though every cobblestone under her shoes was asking who she wanted to become. She held her mother's sketchbook in one hand, her train ticket in the other. Florence. Not because anyone told her to go, not because anyone cleared the path, but because she wanted to see Michelangelo's David with her own eyes. She wanted to sketch it, trace each line of marble muscle, and remember that even stone can be carved into something reaching upward. Behind her footsteps, she knew by heart, paused on the bridge. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. "I thought I might find you here." Matteo's voice carried low, almost tender. "How did you know?" she asked, her eyes still on the water. "You mentioned wanting to see everything Rome had to offer," he said. "And this bridge, it appears in every guidebook." A pause, then softer. "And because I wasn't ready to let you disappear without goodbye." Nora finally turned. He looked different in daylight, less like marble, more like a man. Exhaustion shadowed his eyes, but something else lived there too, something she dared not name. "You've given me more than I can repay," she said. "But if I stay, I'll never know if I chose you, or if I simply surrendered to your power." He nodded once, pain flickering across his face like lightning. "Then you must go. Find out who you are when no one is watching." Her throat tightened, but she managed a small smile. "And maybe when I know I'll come back. Or maybe I'll just carry the memory of a man who taught me that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty." She slipped the ticket into her pocket and leaned close, kissing his cheek one last time. "Be careful, Matteo Vitale. The world needs men like you, even if women like me can't stay in your shadow." She walked away without looking back. Her figure disappeared into the crowd of tourists, her sketchbook clutched like a compass, pointing to a life she would choose for herself. That night in his office high above Rome, Matteo opened the envelope she had left him. Her handwriting curved across the page. "Thank you for showing me that I am worth saving. Thank you for teaching me the difference between protection and freedom. I will carry both. Goodbye for now." 3 months later, a postcard arrived at his desk. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel printed on one side. On the back in her hand, "Learning to paint again. Learning to fly." Matteo closed his eyes and pressed the card against his chest. For the first time in years, he let himself hope. And the question lingered like a shadow across the eternal city. When she finds herself, will she ever return?